Hey friends, this is Sean Washburn from YourExcelTutor.com, and you're watching 30 Tips in 30 Days. And today on day 12, we're going to be talking about data validation. So I know it's not super exciting, but it is really helpful. And if you've never gotten into it, or even if you have used it, maybe you can pick up a tip or something you didn't know about it today. So by default, or just kind of to sum up what data validation is, it's a way to constrain what text or numbers or whatever you're going to enter into a cell to make it a certain way, to make sure that it's only, this or this, or a certain length. Like, let's say you're going to put in a password, and the password has to be longer than 8 characters. Like always happens online. This is a way to do that. Another thing, what I use it for most is to have a list drop down. That's kind of my main use for it, and we're going to get to that in a second. But by default, you don't realize it, but every file, when you start out, every cell in that file has data validation. It's just that it's not constricting it to anything. It basically lets you put in anything by default. It's almost like you've got a fenced-in backyard, but the gate is just open. It lets anything go in and out. So what we're going to do, we're going to use this file. We're going to track some pizza orders, and I'll show you how this might be used. So for name, we're just going to leave this kind of wide open. We'll say Bob Smith. I know that's just kind of random name. And for phone number, if you watched my tip on, I think it was day 5, we talked about custom formatting for phone numbers. What I did, I already set this up here. I'm going to go into, I'll show you this real quick. Format cells. I have a custom format set up where I already have the numbers and then what I want everything to look like with parentheses and dashes and stuff. So when I type in a number, 888-555-1212, just straight up, it'll automatically format it for me. So I love having that option, especially if you know you're going to put in a phone number or a date or whatever thing like that. So here's what gets interesting. And I already have a sort of a drop down here. We're gonna get rid of this one. So say any value. So by default, you go in here. If you go to data validation, everything by default says any value. That lets you put anything in. If you look at the drop down here, you've got different options, and you can try out some of these and play around with them. But it's basically saying if I pick this, it's only going to let me put a whole number in there, so no decimals. If I pick this, only a decimal. Date, time, text length. That's kind of like your password type of thing. And then custom, and that's a whole different ball game. We're not going to get into that in this video, but the main one we're going to look at is list. So in this case, it gives you two options. You can either type in a list, so I can type in here like small, comma, medium, comma, large. I could do it that way, but what I like to do instead, because once I do that, if I want to change that, I have to come back in here and kind of redo it. What I like to do instead is, I'll just delete that, is use this flyout. And I already have another tab where I have already set up lists. So I kind of like to do it that way, find it to be cleaner, and then if I want to change anything, I just change the list. It's a lot easier to do. So over here we're going to say size. We're going to actually just pick this range. And I could pick those 4, but I'm going to pick a couple more just in case if I wanted to add a couple sizes or whatever, I could just add them really easily into that list. So we're going to click OK. And I'll click OK, and so you'll see all of a sudden when that drop down is not there until I click on that cell, and then I've got these options. So we'll go back in here and we'll just look at this. So but the things that were checked, you'll see ignore blank was checked. That means that I can leave this blank and it's going to be okay with that. If I uncheck that, it won't let me leave that cell until I pick one of the the chosen options. And then in cell drop down is just to basically have that show up, which you could have you could have that not show up and just have a list of options and you leave people to guess. If you're going to have a list, I wouldn't use that. You might use this. You might uncheck that if you have some other different thing that you're looking at. Another thing here is input message. And right now it's blank. By default it's blank, but I could have it, I could say, select size. I know that's kind of redundant because it says size, but just to give some instruction. One thing I found was if you just put a title, it won't show up, but if you put a title on text or just put text, that'll show up. So we're going to put that in there, and you can just uncheck this too if you don't want it. And then error alert is basically what happens if someone tries to enter something, if they try to type in something that isn't one of the options. What's it going to do? Is it going to let them do that or not? In this case, I don't want to let that be an option. I want to force someone to pick from the options that I have selected. But there are cases where, and I've worked with files like this, where we left this unchecked like this, so that you do have an option to put a custom. Actually, we'll put that here on toppings. We're going to leave that unchecked on toppings because maybe there's a topping and it's a custom order, whatever. We want the person entering this to be able to override that. Okay, so we'll say OK. Alright, so now when I click on that cell, it says select size. I go here, okay, it's a medium. And same thing, we're going to go to crust. And I'm going to do this a little quicker here. We're going to go over, select list. Come back to list. Okay, crust type. Got those. Okay, so crust, we're going to say, it's a thick crust. Yep. So toppings, like I said, this one we're going to do a little different. We're still going to do a list. And we're going to come over here to our toppings. But in this case, I'm going to leave some room in here, some extra. But we're also going to say, we're going to leave this open so that someone could pick, they could type in something custom. So let's say we go, sausage. We're like, oh, you know what? It's actually sausage and mushrooms. All right, so that way there's still that option. Now that's not one of the things in the list, but I can type it in, so that gives you that option. Now verification code, what we're going to say is, let's say when they're entering this into whatever other system, that there was some verification code and it was 8 digits long. So we're going to say text length has to be 8 digits. And it could be letters, numbers, whatever. But so if I try to type in this, it says retry. Now I could put a message in here. We didn't do that. But if I say, code must be 8 digits. Right, so we could say that. Let's try it again. Blah. It says code must be 8 digits. Okay, so we'll say, ASDF. And let's just put it in. So just some different ways you can use it. I found it to be really helpful, especially if you're working, most of you are watching this, you probably have some kind of data you work with, maybe in finance, maybe you're in manufacturing like I am, whatever, you're working with clients, customers, tracking budgets, anything like that. There's always a use for data validation, and once you play around with it, that's what I suggest, is just, you don't have to use it like I use it with the list. I just find that to be cleaner. But play around with it, find some ways that you can use it most effectively, and then once you have these formatted, then you're going to want to make sure, what I would do is I would format them first before I put anything in there, and then I would just copy all those all the way down, so that as you're putting new stuff in, that those drop downs are going to be, you notice that it's here but it's not here. So I want that to translate all the way down. Alright, so hope that helps. I know it's a longer one, but data validation is a little more in depth. Yeah, let me know if you got any questions, and we'll check in tomorrow for another tip.